Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is State Leadership in Clean Energy, NYSERDA's Offshore Wind Program. This webinar is part of the Clean Energy States Alliance 2020 State Leadership in Clean Energy Awards webinar series. Before we pass it over to our presenters, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can connect via telephone or via computer mic and speakers. You can click on the orange arrow that you see circled to minimize your webinar console, and you can also click on that to expand it if you'd like to see things such as the questions box, which we have circled here. We encourage you to please submit questions and comments throughout the webinar. We will save some time following our presentations for a Q&A with the audience. We'll get to as many questions as we can, but we do ask you to submit your questions and comments when you think of them. Don't wait until the very end. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email with a copy of the webinar recording within about 48 hours or so. And we'll also be posting a copy of the webinar on our website at cesa.org/webinars. So with that, I'd like to now pass it over to our first speaker, Warren Leon. Warren is the Executive Director of the Clean Energy States Alliance, and he's going to get us started. Warren?
Hey, thanks very much. I just want to use a couple minutes to make sure everybody understands what the SLICE awards are and why and how NYSERDA has been recognized for their work on offshore wind. And then I will turn it over to Val Story, who's going to moderate the session. If we could go to the next slide. CESA is a membership organization, and we're composed of public agencies across the country. We have members in 20 states. You can see their logos up here on the website, and we do a wide range of activities with them. But one thing we do every 2 years is to hold the SLICE Awards, the State Leadership in Clean Energy Awards. And if you can go to the next slide. What we do is each one of our member organizations can nominate one of their programs or projects for a SLICE Award. We then have those nominations judged, not by CESA staff, but by distinguished experts in the field of clean energy across the country, independent judges who decide which projects and programs deserve awards. These are given out to agencies that have done something truly innovative, something that deserves to be emulated by other states. And the range of projects that can win awards is pretty varied. And if we go to the next slide, you can see who won this year. We had 6 winners. California Energy Commission for their renewable energy and agriculture program. We had 3 projects that had to do one way or another with low and moderate income solar, the Energy Trusts of Oregon's Inclusive Innovation Project, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, one for the Mass Solar Loan Program, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, one for their low to moderate income access program, and Sacramento Municipal Utility District, one for their energy storage shares. We have a report where you could read case studies of each of these programs and projects that won awards. We're doing webinars on all of them. Today, as you know, the one is focused on NYSERDA and offshore wind. But all of these programs and all of these agencies have truly done something innovative, something that deserves recognition. And we are really delighted that we had the opportunity to highlight their good work. And we're also delighted that the winners have been willing to talk about their project in this series of webinars. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Val Story, who's going to moderate this session and introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Hi, everyone. This is Val Story. I'm a project director at CESA. Yes, so as Warren mentioned, today we're going to be hearing about New York's policies and programs that are helping the state achieve a carbon neutral economy and 100% clean carbon-free electricity by 2040. And offshore wind is a major component of this effort through both the Clean Energy Standard and the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which you'll hear about in the upcoming presentation. Offshore wind is slated to provide 9,000 megawatts of energy by 2035. And the agency leading this charge is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And they're responsible for the coordination of offshore wind development throughout New York. And most recently, as many of you have likely heard, they issued the nation's single largest offshore wind solicitation for up to 2,500 megawatts of offshore wind. So we're going to hear about how offshore wind programs and policies have developed in New York. A reminder that throughout the presentation, please feel free to type in your questions as you think of them rather than waiting until the end. And then we'll have the last 10 to 15 minutes for a moderated Q&A. So now going to hand things over to Adrienne Downey. She's the principal engineer for offshore wind at NYSERDA. In this role, she's responsible for running New York State's procurement efforts for offshore wind, including the recent procurements as well as NYSERDA's stakeholder engagement efforts. She comes to NYSERDA from more than a decade's experience in onshore wind and a consulting practice in climate adaptation and resiliency projects. She's worked internationally in Europe and across Canada on a range of roles in industrial and production engineering, supply chain localization and development strategy, operations management, business development, and policy and government affairs. Adrienne, thanks for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Val, for that kind introduction, and thank you so much, Warren, for kicking us off, and Samantha. And really, thanks to the entire Clean Energy States Alliance team. We're at NYSERDA huge fans of your collective work, and it is a tremendous honor to be recipients this year of this incredible award. We are honored, and certainly our congrats, likewise, to the 6 other awardees in the 2020 cohort, and our sincere thanks to those esteemed judges that Warren, you indicated. It is a great honor. We are so proud of the work that we've been able to do on offshore wind. As Val indicated, it's a tremendously important part of our state's goals, and we'll look forward to the opportunity to share a little bit about the policies and the programs that help to inform our goals and our approach, and then some fairly hot off the press news with regards to our recently launched solicitation. So with that, I think we have quite a bit of content to tackle, and I look forward to questions here at the end. So we'll dive right in. So as Val indicated, New York has incredibly ambitious climate policies in place. We are committed as a state to 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2040. That is the most aggressive target in the nation towards decarbonization of our electricity grid. But it's also part of a broader suite of climate legislation and goals that the state has under our nation-leading Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA, as you'll often hear it. Tends to be a bit of a mouthful, full on, but in whole, it's the CLCPA is a really comprehensive look at how we make not only a carbon-free transition to our electricity grid, but also to our entire economy, and how do we do so in a way that is just and equitable. And so it's important to recognize that the CLCPA is a powerful suite of again, decarbonization legislation, but also climate and social equity goals that seek to enhance our suite of technologies, whether they're from renewable energy with specific targets for offshore wind, for solar, for storage, specific carve-outs for each of those three technologies. But by overall, we're looking at 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 levels by 2050. And so that will and we'll touch briefly upon that. That is an incredibly comprehensive ask of our economy, in addition to our electricity sector, and that is the scope of the CLCPA to do so. And we recognize that in so doing, that is I'm sitting here today from Brooklyn, New York, as Tropical Storm Isaiah is moving up the East Coast, and this is the frequency, the severity of storms is increasing. The urgency of climate change action is upon us without a doubt, and New York State leadership has been unequivocal in its commitments to that. But we also recognize that these aggressive and ambitious targets are a tremendous opportunity. So New York recognizes that clean energy is a major economic engine for the state. You'll note that some of these figures here relating to growth in 2018, really show that this is the sector in the economy of the future. And so we are making sure that our efforts are tackling our climate leadership, our climate stewardship obligations, but seizing the opportunity for an economic pivot for our state, and that is only doubled down as we look to the current situation in wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, or rather in the midst still of the COVID-19 pandemic. These are incredibly powerful jobs that admittedly have been hit, but are primed to bounce back. And building back better is going to be a focus of today's conversation as well. So the work that the CLCPA enshrined in 2019, so in July of 2019, that act was enshrined in New York State law. It works off of a history of significant ramp up of renewable energy in the state, and including this past spring's suite of awards for an additional 21 large-scale solar, wind, and energy storage projects across upstate New York. Since 2017, NYSERDA and New York combined have been busy in securing about 70 projects to a subtotal of 6,100 megawatts, which is already an incredible amount of work in progress that we've made. And so it was with this confidence that the legislation was enshrined, and we look forward to continuing the work that we've been doing both on the land-based side of our shop, but also increasing on offshore wind, and that's the focus, of course, of today's conversation. And so the CLCPA enshrines a specific target of at least 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. It's NYSERDA's understanding and our assessments to date that 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035 will bring approximately 10,000 jobs, direct jobs to New York State. It will deliver approximately enough power for 6 million homes, which is tantamount to around 30% of New York's electricity load. And in so doing, we anticipate that as well, these projects will bring literally billions of dollars in infrastructure spending from the private sector, and spurring tremendous uptake in our uptake and investments in our electricity grid, but also in critical infrastructure and cutting edge technologies to support this burgeoning new industry. I flagged that there have been there has been some important discussion about our 9,000 megawatt of offshore wind goal on the public sector docket. We will talk a little bit about that further on in the presentation, but it is the subject right now of a white paper that NYSERDA has put forward in tandem with the Department of Public Service staff to New York State's Public Service Commission in order to start or help to shape, how we're going to be rolling that out. So a little teaser, we'll be talking about that again, that is a live and active point of discussion on New York's Public Service Commission docket. But when we speak with stakeholders, and as we'll hear, stakeholders are an incredibly important part of our program. It's important that we convey why offshore wind. And I appreciate that many of the folks that may be attending today's webinar, are engaged in the clean energy sectors and understand, how and why New York State is looking at this resource. But it is important that we convey to the broader public, why is it that we're looking so closely at offshore wind, and why do we have such an ambitious target, and it really boils down to these few points in that the potential for clean and renewable and locally produced power is just enormous, and it is so proximal to where the demand is highest on the eastern seaboard. As we look to the prospects and the billions of dollars in investments that I just alluded to, we anticipate that those will be major infrastructure investments in our grid, but also in many of our local communities, and that presents a tremendous opportunity to help build our infrastructure capacity that will service this industry, but also service and enable other industries. We look to the prospect of jobs, literally thousands of jobs, both in short and long-term jobs, and these are skilled jobs, quality, well-paying positions that will either be, in part of the construction, design and construction of these projects, but also in their long-term operations and maintenance. And then fundamentally, as described, it's the opportunity to meaningfully work towards our decarbonization goals of our electricity grid. And for those of you who are aware, in New York State, the downstate grid, the NYSO has characterized the New York Independent System Operator, the NYSO, has characterized New York's grid as the tale of two grids, with a relatively clean upstate grid and a very dirty downstate grid. And so offshore wind really gives us a unique opportunity to effectuate on that decarbonization goal. And we're not the only ones to see this value proposition. So states up and down the coast from Maine all the way through the Carolinas are looking very closely at offshore wind, and likewise, California on the West Coast. But these regional market ambitions, speaking primarily about the northeastern Atlantic seaboard, have just escalated tremendously over the past number of years, and for all of the same reasons that I just enumerated that are pertinent to New York, they are pertinent to our highly built up and highly populated eastern seaboard. So the vastness of the resource has been recognized, and the opportunity for economic development as well as for decarbonization, is firmly on the minds of our neighbor states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, very specifically, have very advanced targets. Virginia has come on board, more recently, with tremendous targets there as well. And so we see this as really an exciting prospect. If you'd asked anyone about offshore wind 3 or 4 years ago, they would have scratched their head and thought about it more as a European experience. But now we see what is in aggregate, a 26 pushing 30 gigawatt regional market that puts us squarely on the global map. And so that is a really exciting prospect and helps to inform our approach. But as you can also see from this map, offshore wind is unique in that it straddles both state ambitions, but also federal jurisdiction. So the dotted line that you're seeing here that runs around 3 nautical miles off of the entire coastline speaks to that divide. And so when we look at the question of who and what for offshore wind, it's important to recognize the various players. So we work very closely with the Department of Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, and so they serve as the federal landlord, if you will, of these lease areas. They oversee the leasing process and all federal permitting processes, whereas the states, service for the onshore portion. So once a cable comes to shore, then the state permitting processes are likewise invoked. The states are involved in NYSERDA for New York at the head in energy policy and strategy development. Stakeholder engagement is a tremendously important part of our program, but likewise, research, data development, and all of the economic goals that have been previously enumerated. But we're probably best known for our participation as long-term revenue contract suppliers with projects for New York's product, which is OREX, the purchase of offshore wind renewable energy certificates from these projects as a financial enabling structure to support projects' ultimate delivery. But we do work in close connection, of course, on these statewide processes with our counterparts, such as the Department of State, Department of Environmental Conservation, Department of Public Service, and others, of course, beyond. And without a doubt, we work hand in glove with the industry. This is an incredibly dynamic and exciting industry, and that is inclusive of course, offshore wind developers, so the leaseholders of those spaces that were in the map a moment ago, but also, suppliers, OEMs, original equipment and manufacturers, and tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, likewise port infrastructure operators and proponents. Those it's important that we make sure that when we are building a new industry, that we are cognizant of the various players and roles and the ways in which we can work collaboratively with the industry in order to get it right and to maximize on the opportunity. So offshore wind for NYSERDA is beyond just our procurement work, as much fanfare as that understandably gets. Our work is multifaceted. We work on, as I indicated, supply chain and economic development work. We have supply chain databases that we support. We work very closely to help advance technologies and lowering costs, and including work with the national, or rather work to set up the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium. We work very closely with stakeholders and with data and science to make sure that we have a firm understanding of impacts and benefits. How is it that the offshore wind industry will affect New Yorkers? And those are both New Yorkers that are onshore as well as New Yorkers that are offshore. And that speaks to, of course, stakeholders that have important incumbent interests in the space, whether they're the maritime industry or commercial fishing industries, recreational fishing industries. These are important sectors of our economy and important livelihoods and cultural resources that are really important for us to understand. Infrastructure, without a doubt, always has impacts, but how can we work to support coexistence, to support a common understanding of how this industry is going to unfold, and to make sure that there is constructive dialogue towards same. But then once we bring the power to shore and build these projects, we are talking about a wholesale transformation of our electricity grid. When we talk about 100% clean carbon-free electricity by 2040, and particularly decarbonizing our downstate resources, that is just going to be an incredibly important part of, from a technical and social perspective, and social justice perspective and climate justice perspective, the environmental justice opportunities that are part of that discussion are just tremendous. And so it's important, as we think about offshore wind and we think about, as dramatic and as provocative of an industry as this is, that we do so in a way that is round, and is wholesome and is engaging of many voices, both here in New York State, but also in the region. So we, certainly were very excited last July 2019, in tandem with the signing of the CLCPA into New York State law. We announced our first two projects, and we executed contracts for these two projects in October of 2019. We totaled approximately 1,700 megawatts with the selection of Empire Wind, which is located, the Empire Wind team, which is Equinor. They affectionately refer to their lease area as the pizza slice in the New York site. That project, 816 megawatts, is anticipated to connect into the Gowanus substation in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where it will be working in tandem with proposed port operations, particularly operations and maintenance activities, being based out of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, likewise in Sunset Park. The second project that we have engaged is the Sunrise Wind Project, 880 megawatts, and that is the project to the east of Long Island, approximately 30 miles off of the eastern tip of Montauk. And that project for 880 megawatts is being developed by Ørsted in a joint venture together with New England utility Eversource. And so these two projects are, an incredibly important pivot and an exciting prospect for us as a state, in that we are starting to see, these investments in port infrastructure between the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, prospectively Port Jefferson for the Sunrise Wind Project, and likewise up in the Capital Region, manufacturing activities being proposed for the Port of Albany and the Port of Queens, respectively. These are where we start to see all of our planning and conception start to become reality. So the rubber is hitting the road now as a state with real and live active projects, and we were so excited to announce these first two projects and to see their active development. But before we talk about the impacts of those specific projects, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things for those who are interested and deep in the weeds. These projects are again contracted in October of 2019. Their entirety of their contracts are published on the Department of Public Services docket for offshore wind, and likewise on NYSERDA's offshore wind website. You can find them as very large appendices, respectively, to the Phase 1 report that we published, which talks about the procurement process in detail and the contracting mechanisms and key details. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested in some deeper reading to look into that. But again, just for those who are keen and interested, NYSERDA's engagement with these projects and the outcome of their competitive selection through our first RFP, OREC RFP 18-1, is that NYSERDA is serving as the purchaser of ORECs, of offshore wind renewable energy certificates, so recognizing the environmental attributes that are associated with these projects, that but for the activities of New York State and NYSERDA as purchaser, these projects would be struggled to come to fruition. So the projects are anticipated to receive revenues from NYSERDA for those ORECs on a per megawatt hour as produced, but they're also anticipated to be participants in the New York Independent System Operator, or the NYSO's wholesale market for energy and capacity. And so where the projects, the selected offshore wind bidder, in this case, again, either Empire Wind or Sunrise Wind for the inaugural projects and further projects as we complete successive solicitations, they will be seeking revenues for delivered energy and capacity to New York's grid, and then receiving the remuneration from NYSERDA for those environmental attributes that are concurrently delivered. In addition, NYSERDA serves as a flow-through for our RECs and our ORECs to the load-serving entities in New York State, and so those are the local utilities on a pro-rata share. And so NYSERDA's role here is to serve as the procurement arm, but it's 100% flow-through from the project and the payments that are then distributed on a pro-rata share to the LSCs for capture with ratepayers directly and across our statewide electricity consumers and grid. And so when we look at what that looks like, in addition to those payment pathways and NYSERDA's role as a procurement entity on behalf of the state's LSCs and therefore on behalf of New York State ratepayers, the contracting structures that have been undertaken for these two initial projects is really an innovative structure. Our OREC structure is bound by an index payment structure, whereby the contracts, again, as published as part of the phase one report, indicate the strike prices for these offshore wind projects, and that the payments that NYSERDA anticipates to make to these projects is reflective of the net result of what is the strike price minus the reference energy prices minus the reference capacity prices that these projects will be ensuing. And so the concept of reference here is important in that this isn't a true, a contract for differences. This is really, a market approximation of what energy reference energy and capacity references are within a given zone and within a composite of zones. And so it speaks to a close approximation of the market's behavior within a given period of time. And we have subsequently refined that approximation in this 2020 solicitation that we'll get to in a few moments. But it's important to understand
Adrienne?
that the closeness. Yes, please.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I don't know if it's on your end, but I just wanted to pause. Sorry to interrupt you. There's some background noise. We're not sure where it's coming from because all our attendees are muted. It sounds like typing, or I don't know if the line itself is crackling. I don't hear it now. So Adrienne, I think it might be when you're speaking, but I doubt you're typing at the same time. So a bit of a
No, I'm
conundrum.
not. And I apologize for any
But
distraction.
see, now I hear it while you're speaking. Huh.
Okay, it might be my headset. I do apologize.
Do you want to try taking
to
your headset out and trying again? Let's see if that makes it go away.
We could try the computer audio if you want, Adrienne. That did sound fine.
Well, we can try a few things. We've got tricks up our sleeve. Bear with me. How's that?
Try it. Just speak another sentence.
Is this any better?
I'm still hearing it. If on the webinar console you've got telephone selected, if you select computer audio, then it should redirect to the built-in mic and speakers, and we can try that.
How's that now?
That's better. I'm not hearing the crackling.
Hey, good news. Okay. Well, apologies for the distraction, folks, and sorry for the sound quality issues, but I'm glad that we've resolved it here. So, okay.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Of course. Thanks very much. So, it was really interesting as we conducted this first solicitation. Pardon me. Just going back a touch. When we conducted this first solicitation, it was really an innovative market product for us as a state to be moving forward with, and we were, I think, really excited at the uptake, the industry's response, and in particular that we outshot our estimates, by a significant margin. When we looked at the various modalities that NYSERDA and New York State could be looking at to service this industry and the mechanisms that could be at play. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in a really deep dive on various procurement mechanisms to avail yourself of our 2018 policy options paper that speaks about the different mechanisms at length. But in 2018, as part of that same exercise, we anticipated that an index OREC structure would offer a very important and valuable product to the industry, but also to New York ratepayers in order to help protect them against any sort of overassessments or padding on the part of risk profiles from the development community. This was a really nice sort of meeting of the minds, if you will, of risk and opportunity for both ratepayer and the industry, and that came back in spades when we saw that the 2018 solicitation results in 2019, were confirmed to be at approximately $25 per megawatt hour versus our anticipated or expected pricing of $40 per megawatt hour. So, that was great, great news to hear. It has encouraged us in our 2020 approach, and again, I would just really encourage that if anyone is interested in deeper dives on the entirety of those processes, to avail themselves of the 2018 options paper, and likewise the comprehensive report that we put forward detailing this initial procurement and all of its processes. But with that, and moving it back out of the weeds, we are just so excited by these first two projects. Together, Sunrise Wind and Empire Wind will power more than 1 million homes. They will bring a combined economic impact of $3.2 billion across the state. Tremendous investments in long-term port facilities and cutting-edge technologies to the tune of $85 million. Well-paying careers and direct jobs in project development, component manufacturing, installation, and operations and maintenance. And so, if these are the results from our first solicitation, 1,696 megawatts on our pathway to 9 gigawatts, I think we're really excited about the prospect of what this will offer. And I just provide, by means of a very quick update, that both of these projects are proceeding fully on track throughout the past number of months, and including with the broader COVID-19 circumstances. And so with that, just highlighting for folks who are not aware, we executed contracts last fall. These projects have commissioning dates anticipated by the end of 2024, and in between, they're going to be fully engaged with permitting and approvals. They're going to be engaged with execution on their manufacturing and supply plans, construction and installation between 2022 and 2024, and then likewise, commissioning and moving into full operations and maintenance for the next 25 years. And so, when we think about this infrastructure, we made the announcements last year, and 2024 feels like tomorrow. It's just going to be such a flurry of activity over the next couple of years, and we'll be servicing our grid, for the better part of 30 years here afterwards. But I would be remiss if we didn't also highlight, and for those who are following the industry closely, NYSERDA's awards are in complement to an award that New York State has also made together with the Long Island Power Authority. So the Long Island Power Authority has 130 megawatts under contract with the South Fork project, which is again another project being developed through the joint venture of Ørsted and Eversource Energy. And so together with NYSERDA's 2018 solicitation and 2019 executed contracts, that brings the entirety of New York's development or active development to an excess of 1,800 megawatts, and with the South Fork project having been confirmed in 2015. And so we are really excited that between these three projects, it shows that New York State has more offshore wind under active development than any other state currently in the nation. And so just touching, as we said we would, on a couple of things that are pertinent for folks who are following the industry closely. In June of this summer, NYSERDA, in tandem with the New York State Department of Public Service, put forward what is effectively a white paper to show how our clean energy standard, which is the regulatory framework that supports our erstwhile 50 by 30, 50% renewable energy by 2030 targets, how do those increase now that the CLCPA has enshrined a 70% renewable energy by 2030 target, and likewise, as said at the outset here, 100% clean by 2040. And so focusing specifically on the topic of offshore wind and recognizing that comments on this white paper are due at the end of this month, there's a couple of things that we wanted to highlight, and not the least of which is that the effort of the white paper is looking at the CLCPA and beyond. The CLCPA, specifically for offshore wind, said 9 gigawatts at least of offshore wind by 2035. We have been looking at our decarbonization goal. As you'll recall from the outset, we have 85% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050. That is not going to come exclusively from decarbonization of our electricity supply. It's going to come through deep decarbonization of all of our sectors across the state. And so we start to look at, how much deeper penetration would those levels be. And so it starts to tee up a framework that will absolutely achieve the CLCPA's strict guidelines, but also achieve those deeper goals and mandates of carbon reduction cross sector. And so looking by 2050, and this is I think a really interesting and provocative assessment, the Climate Action Council in New York State has recently published a deep decarbonization pathways analysis, and that can be found via the link that's shown, which shows that above and beyond the CLCPA specific targets, in order to achieve the prospects of what we need to be looking at multiple sectors, deeper decarbonization of our electricity grid, including potential for as much as 15.5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, and likewise looking at prospects of CCS, hydrogen. And so these are all going to be, tremendously valuable and enabling technologies when we think about working in tandem with offshore wind. And so the Clean Energy Standard doesn't necessarily, focus on those items in specific, but it does start to tee up a framework that is conducive to those ultimate goals, and that will help, carry us through. But specific to achievement of the 9 gigawatt goal, it's important to recognize that the white paper has proposed formal adoption of our state's goal. So this is again aligning the regulatory framework with the legal framework here in New York State. So how do we achieve 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035? Well, we do so with our prior procurements as indicated. We do so with this current solicitation as just recently launched, and we do so with procurements, successive procurements through 2027 to meet this goal. And so what is interesting is that we are committing to, we have rather proposed to the Public Service Commission that we commit to, a minimum, a floor, if you will, for procurement targets to be achieved per year. But of course, if we have gone forward with a larger solicitation in a given year, timing and market factors, being material, that we can reserve a degree of flexibility to do so in an effective manner. So this gives the industry the certitude that at a bare minimum between 750 and 1,000 megawatts will be procured per year, but it doesn't mean that we will necessarily host annual procurements. And so it's a mixing of both, and we think it offers again the flexibility to the state to watch market forces as they are at play, but also to offer the requisite certitude that the industry is hoping for, and that we are cognizant of as investment decisions are being made. And we see this as part of, again, making sure that we are offering not only, a sizable market, but also a longevity of the market. And so building 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035, we recognize can create more than 10,000 jobs, but it best does so if we can offer, a degree of certitude and opportunity, and that we do so in a way that is the most sustainable. We are interested in cultivating long-term investments in supply chain activities, in manufacturing activities, and operations and maintenance activities. And to do so, we need to have a steady pipeline. And so again, our proposal to the Public Service Commission is in an effort to do that. And just want to flag a couple of priorities, that when we looked at, the successes, of our offshore wind contracts from as we came through those initial contracting last year, and we looked at our 2020 goals, and looking to particularly job growth, it's important for us to think about the new the new workforce and how do we support a just transition and particularly uptake in New York's disadvantaged communities, environmental justice areas, and making sure that communities of color who are underrepresented in the workforce, how are we engaging with them? How are we offering training that helps to support the facilitation of labor in our skilled trades into this new industry? And so it's a comprehensive look at how we do that. And Governor Cuomo was adamant that the state put forward resources to make sure that that happens. And so we are going to be launching this year, working very closely with SUNY Farmingdale and Stony Brook, that being the State University of New York, and those two locations, to create what will be an umbrella framework of $20 million through an offshore wind training institute that will help to competitively solicit and award monies to be supporting workforce development in each of those strategic tranches. And likewise, we looked at, how do we engage with stakeholders on a meaningful basis, and how do we continue our environmental stewardship and leadership. We engaged 2 fisheries liaisons as a state in order to make sure that we are closely aligned and in close communication with the commercial fisheries, but also with recreational fisheries, recognizing that those are very different interests in many regards, and that we continue to evolve, major progress, I think, in the understanding of best management practices for our offshore stakeholders through the work that we initiated in mitigation plans, and that has since been uptaken from neighboring states. And then we furthermore, recognized that we needed to get back out in the market. So we looked at 2020 as the year in which we would pivot from our initial successes and work to launch our next solicitation. And we couldn't be more excited to share that on the 21st of July, that second solicitation is now live. We launched the solicitation seeking a minimum of 1,000 megawatts and up to as much as 2,500 megawatts, and recognizing the state's firm commitments to port infrastructure investment. This is a solicitation that is being done in collaboration with and firmly bundled with port infrastructure investments, whereby New York State will be bringing to bear approximately $200 million in public funding, and soliciting one-to-one matching of private dollars to bring our total investment of $400 million into port infrastructure investment at this critical moment in time. And so that is, in fulfillment of the Public Service Commission's authorization in April. They have continued to support an evaluation structure that factors in 70% price, 20% economic benefits, and 10% viability. And again, full details you can please find at our solicitation webpage. And what we wanted to do here was just to help share a couple of highlights from the new solicitation. There's far more that we can cover, and again, these slides will be available, and we're happy to answer any questions. But it really is trying to maximize the co-benefits of having an offshore wind project and having state funding secured, both together and working in lockstep in order to advance not only projects but the critical port infrastructure investments that will be the drivers of significant manufacturing and operations and staging activities potentially. And so we worked last fall to sequence a series of pre-qualifications. 11 ports, as shown here, are pre-qualified to participate and in this current solicitation, and they can work with all of the eligible developers, which are those parties with leaseholders, active leases in the broader New England, New York Bight, and New Jersey offshore wind lease areas. And so their partnerships and working in tandem to create, to build, proposals that speak to both the generation and the port infrastructure opportunities, is an incredibly powerful signal that that we want to offer, certainly a sizable market opportunity, but also sizable securities to those to both of those parties to make sure that those projects can be delivered and that the economic development potential can be maximized. There are a couple of things that, for those who watched our 2018 solicitation closely, are repeats. We continue to support prevailing wage and project labor agreements with our projects. We continue to prioritize opportunities for New York State minority and women-owned businesses, as well as service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, so-called MWBEs or SDVOBs, in execution of these projects. And we continue through especially the 20% economic benefits evaluation criteria to incentivize jobs and project spending and infrastructure investments. And again, that is only redoubled with the combination with the port's solicitation, and that those those economic claims as made through these proposals are indeed backed by independent audit and verification, and a firm commitment towards payment of those claims. And again, if you're interested in the details, I would encourage you to look at both of the published contracts from the 2019 October contracts, where you can see the exact contractual language that underpins those efforts. But again, further, with the enactment of the CLCPA, new to the solicitation is a redoubled emphasis on prioritization of low-income prioritization, of benefits to disadvantaged communities, recognizing that that is a definition that is still in flux through the Climate Action Council here in New York State. But our articulation of certainly recognizing low-income census tracts, but also in environmental justice areas as being tantamount to at least the initial spirit of that definition. And then furthermore, we have a couple of notable new provisions to share, including a consideration for the project's carbon footprint. So we're sending here, a signal to the market that we are interested in learning more about what it is to buy clean in this sector. What are the opportunities that we have in making these meaningful procurements to really maximize not only their carbon-free operations, but also how can we be working proactively and in the design phase to mitigate the carbon footprint that is associated with their construction and design. How can we likewise be working with stakeholders on an enhanced fashion? So we've talked about our mitigation plans, and we've talked about the leadership that New York State exercised. Those have been redoubled, refined. They're now standardized as mitigation plans, strengthened as mitigation plans, and buttressed even further by financial and technical support for regional wildlife and key commercial fish stocks. So again, reiterating the need to focus in on data and science to help us support and grow and advance our policies here as a state in these projects and their stewardship. And so with that, I'm coming to the end here, and I realize that we're going to have just a few minutes for questions. But I would encourage that if particularly folks are interested in a much deeper dive on our program, we will be hosting a public webinar this coming Friday between 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern here on the Eastern Seaboard. Certainly, you're more than welcome to join us then. But likewise, we will be hosting a proposers conference next week at 10 a.m. Eastern time, where we will be unpacking the solicitation, in great detail. And so, encourage, if anyone is interested in a deeper dive, that you please feel free to join us. Of course, the primary audience are the developers of offshore wind projects and the port developers working in partnership therewith, and likewise, supply chain. But it is open to other participants. So if you are so inclined, please do feel free to join us. We will be focusing on engagement and dialogue with the industry formally through the RFP's prescribed processes through the month of August, and then looking at bids being due on October the 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern time again. And so with that, I think that pretty much wraps us up. I would like to reinforce that I know that the purpose of this call was webinar was to speak specifically about the offshore wind program, but the July 21st announcements that we made were part of a comprehensive suite of announcements that really redouble again our commitment to 100% clean carbon-free electricity by 2040, how aggressive we are in fulfillment of that goal, and the economic opportunity that this uniquely presents to us as a state, and especially now as we look to build back better. It was in tandem with land-based solicitations that together as a suite are approximately 4,000 megawatts in total, and that those clean energy projects, offshore wind and land-based renewable energies, are anticipated to bring approximately $7 billion in investments and the better part of 4,500 jobs. And so with that, I think pretty much getting close on time here. Cognizant, Val, that you would want to open it up for questions, and I'm happy to take any at this point in time if time still permits.
Great. Thank you, Adrienne, and thank you, New York, for your great leadership in this space. So yes, we have received a lot of questions. Luckily, you've answered many of them throughout the course of your presentation, but let's move on to a few that remain unanswered. Start with some general questions. What do you know off the top of your head, what % of carbon-free electricity will come from offshore wind? What's offshore wind's contribution in relation to other renewables?
Sure. By 2035, offshore wind is anticipated to deliver approximately 30% of New York's electricity load.
Great, thank you. And is any of this offshore wind build out, how does it relate to peaker plant replacement? Is that a purpose of the offshore wind itself, or?
It's certainly one of many purposes of offshore wind. The opportunity to site large, impacting from a decarbonization perspective, power in as congested and as built up areas as New York City and Long Island, which are the downstate zones, is extremely difficult. And so to date, that has just been an incredibly tough nut for the state to crack in terms of helping to support renewable energy uptake, and particularly uptake at scale, so as to be able to offer a viable alternative to turning off the incumbent fleet, which is ultimately fossil fuel and peaker based. And so we need to make sure that we have the technical solutions at play in order to make sure that we are making this transition in a way that is coordinated and supports the resiliency of the grid and ensures that there is no interruption to those critical communities and critical economies.
Thank you. So earlier in your presentation, you gave us some examples of how the entire region is building out offshore wind. And I'm wondering if you could say a few words on NYSERDA's actions and thoughts on regional cooperation. Are there any specific sectors within offshore wind development that are better suited for regional cooperation or collaboration than others? And what is New York doing?
Sure. No, that's a great question, and one that we get often. We work very closely with our neighboring states. Again, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island. We are really interested in pursuing as much as possible a regional dialogue. Recognizing that a lot of the stakeholders that exist in this space are not unique to New York. A commercial fisherman is interested in the entire region. He is not interested in boundaries. The North Atlantic right whale is not interested in regional boundaries. How we engage with those constituencies and species, really behooves a regional approach. And so we do work very closely with our neighboring states on those regional stakeholder dialogue opportunities. But of course, there are increasing questions of how can we better align some of our processes, timing, And those are all, I think, really important conversations that we at New York are clearly, very interested in continuing to engage, with our neighboring states in order to help offer as cohesive, cohesive as approach as possible for the benefit of stakeholders, and as much disambiguation or coordination as possible is welcome to an international industry looking at the United States as a single country rather than as an agglomeration of states. And so, that's tricky in our brand of federalism, and it's tricky with diverse interests within the region, but it is really important that we do work together, and certainly, an incredible hats off to our state counterparts in each of those states who are working diligently to advance their programs, and we do communicate regularly and look forward to doing so increasingly as this industry pivots into reality.
Thank you for that. If you have time, we can close up with one more question, which sort of picks up on what you were just talking about, that fishing is a regional topic and of regional interest and a regional industry. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that you've hired a couple of public, or actually fishing-specific engagement coordinators, and someone was wondering, what has the response been from the fishing community itself to NYSERDA's plans?
Sure, and that's a great question. So the response has been a couple of years in the making. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't want to mischaracterize our engagement of these fishing of our state fisheries liaison as a new approach to commercial. Their engagement is new, but we've been engaging with commercial and recreational fishermen over the past number of years. We've held meetings on the docks, we've held open houses in the communities that support commercial fishing as primary livelihoods. Particularly on the east end of Long Island, but also, our work with fisheries is about trying to make sure that we have data, that we have science, that we have an understanding of the diversity of what fishing even represents, the difference of equipment, of species and approaches. And the more that we understand, the more that we can actually work together and collaboratively to promote coexistence. And so it is understood, that those are important, again, cultural heritage elements of New York's history, but also important livelihoods. And so to the extent that, again, we can be working collaboratively, informed by data and science and with dialogue, to figure out how to advance this industry in a way that promotes coexistence and successful coexistence is paramount. And that's in particular what our fishing technical working group has been instrumental in helping to foster that dialogue and understanding.
Thank you. All right, with that, I think we can wrap up. We have a couple of announcements and upcoming webinars to introduce you to. And actually, Adrienne, one more question for you. You mentioned a public webinar this upcoming Friday. How can folks learn more about this webinar?
Sure, I'm happy to offer that. If you go to our offshore wind website, which is offshorewind.ny.gov, and you click on the announcements and events, you can find links to our webinar that's coming up this Friday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time again. And certainly welcome anyone who would like to join us. I'm remiss in not, again, thanking the CESA team for the opportunity to share out during this webinar today. So thanks again.
Oh, many thanks to you, and thanks to all of you for staying on the line. We have a couple of upcoming webinars up on the screen. The next one is also a SLICE Award winner on SMUD's, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District's Energy Storage Shares Program. One coming up on the role of hydropower in state clean energy policy, and then after that, power after carbon, findings and insights for state policymakers. You can find links to all these webinars on CESA's website at cesa.org/webinars. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My contact info is on the next slide. There you have it. Thanks everyone for your questions and for listening and participating today. Have a great afternoon.